Hello, folks. A funny thing happened to me out hunting the other day. Here I was, drawing a bead on this bird, when he pulled up in front of me and said,
"Hold it, brother. You mean you don't recognize me? I'm Phineas, the Practical Pheasant, the bird that's been the field man for the Committee for Education in South Dakota. That's a large group of people interested in better schools for our state. For the past 5 or 6 years, I've been giving you a biennial bird's-eye view of your schools. The detached, objective picture, since I'm not personally involved. Put up that cannon and let me bring you up to date on your schools. Brother, the early settlers were really on the ball when they made up the state constitution. They wrote, "It shall be the duty of the legislature to establish and maintain a general and uniform system of public schools wherein tuition shall be without charge and equally open to all, and to adopt all suitable means to secure to the people the advantages and opportunities of education." Sure, that's the job of the elected legislators, but they are depending on you to let them know how you feel about your schools so that they can pass the best laws to govern your schools. We birds are getting along pretty well with roughly the same conditions we had back when we first arrived on the South Dakota scene, but man, that's for the birds. When you're planning for the future of your children, that's another story. They can't be saddled with a school situation that's outdated, old-fashioned, obsolete, antiquated, hackneyed. Excuse me, I get carried away when I think of how folks forget all about the schools, as long as the doors are open and the children have a place to go. I know that many of you feel as I do. I shouldn't get to sermonizing. But are we maintaining a uniform system, equally open to all? Have we adopted all suitable means to secure to the people the advantages and opportunities of education? Let's take a look at the record. Years ago, we needed and operated some 3,500 school districts. But now, over 1/3 of our 2,964 school districts are not operating schools. 1 out of every 3. Why? I'll tell you why. Because much of our population is not out in the rural area anymore. Oh, to be sure, there are areas where we will always need rural schools to take care of our rural children. But we're talking about the 1,085 districts that don't operate schools, largely because there are no children there, or because the children can be schooled more easily in a neighboring district. Ever since 1870, our rural population has been steadily decreasing, from 100% then to 61% today. And nearly 1/2 of that big decrease has been in the last 20 years, since 1940, so we can't blame it on the Depression. The reason for non-operating school districts is obvious, because the people there recognize that they don't need a school there anymore. Another reason for 1,085 non-operating school districts is that streamlined pickup of yours. That's a far cry from the buckboard your ancestors used. You get around a lot faster and through weather that used to keep those folks very close to the farmyard. We don't need schools every few miles today as we did years ago, and the rural people have been the first to recognize this and close up those schools. And brace yourself, man, that isn't the worst of it. Of these 1,085 non-operating school districts, 398 of them do not have a school district tax levy. Oh, don't get me wrong. They do pay the common school equalization and the high school tuition levies, but the sum total of the combined averages of these two levies comes to about 11 mills. This is all these 398 school districts pay for the support of public education in South Dakota. Compare it with the mill levy in your school district. The average independent pays about 3 times that much. This kind of support and maintenance is not uniform, is it? But let's get a few more facts about the schools. The financial ability of our operating school districts puts anywhere from $7,500 to $444,000 in assessed valuation to support a classroom, an ability ratio of 1 to 50. And the amount spent per classroom ranges from $2,300 in one district to $9,800 in another. Does this look like a uniform system of schools, or equal opportunity, and the dollars spent say nothing about the quality of education. Some of the highest amounts spent occur in districts where quality is very poor. Actually, we have two systems of public education in South Dakota: a common school system offering elementary education to some 30,000 children, and an independent school system offering elementary and secondary education to some 125,000 children. But only 17% of the land area of the state directly supports and determines the nature of the 12-year school system. The county high school tuition fund pays for the young people who live outside the independent school district, but many times the tuition rate is not enough to pay the actual costs of education. Now, don't misunderstand me. I have not said that the common school education is inferior to independent school education, because that is something that depends on the particular districts you're talking about. But let's look at our high schools. 57% of them have a high school enrollment of 100 or less, far below what is considered necessary to provide essential course offerings for quality education at a reasonable cost to the taxpayer. Only 91 of our 252 high schools in 6061 were rated first class. Only 78 were accredited by the North Central Association. Another way of saying the same thing is that 30% of our young people had to attend a second-class high school in 6061, or their parents had to pay tuition to place their young people in a first-class high school with greater opportunities. The parents in common districts would have to pay higher transportation costs to guarantee this educational opportunity for their young people. Now, folks in South Dakota are demanding quality education. But when we examine the high school course offerings, we see some serious deficiencies. Only 9% offer a course in debating, a necessity in the government of free people. Only 12% offer a course in international relations, when it is truer now than in revolutionary days that the shot fired here is heard around the world. Only 14% offer modern problems. Only 18% offer business arithmetic. Only 39% offer economics, a basic necessity for understanding the conflict between the free world and the communistic nations which seek to enslave human liberty and degrade human dignity. Only 45% offer general business, and only 51% offer a foreign language, and many of these schools offer only one language for only 2 years, not enough to gain a speaking mastery of any language. Only 57% offer sociology. Only 63% offer any industrial arts education, and much of this is 50 years behind the times, consisting only of a little woodworking. The industrial field holds the future of South Dakota's development, and yet less than 2/3 of our high schools make any effort to provide this kind of education. The saddest part of all this is that only a few of our high schools are free from these deficiencies. In fact, a combination of several of these educational imperfections exist in many high schools. Now, if these facts don't spell out a lack of uniformity in public education, consider this. Teacher preparation in our state ranges from the one-year trainee to the master teacher with 5 or 6 years of preparation. True, the one-year trainee is required to earn 6 or 9 credit hours before being qualified to teach another year, but the youngster taught by a one-year trainee has not the same opportunity for education as the youngster being taught by a master teacher. However you define the good teacher, he will be a better teacher with proper preparation.
This bird had me on the ropes with all those facts. I shouted to him, "Enough, enough, you bugged me, bird. I can't solve all the problems of the world. I'm out here for a little relaxation, not a lecture. Say your prayers, Phineas. You're meat on the table as far as I'm concerned." But that doggone bird fixed me with his glittering eye and said,
"Hold on, brother. Give me a little more time. You don't have to solve all the problems of the world. All you have to do is tackle these problems here at home. And there are some things you can do. You know a better education is required today than in 1889. More years in school, a greater diversity of subjects, more specialized buildings and equipment, better trained teachers. All this adds up to substantially increased costs for educating our youngsters, and revenue from local tax sources and state aids have failed to keep the pace. Free people have a sacred obligation to participate in self-government. You should encourage the men you elect to the legislature to establish school districts offering a 12-year program of quality education so that the maximum good can be achieved for the maximum number of children within the framework of local control. Here are some of the goals you can be working toward now. By 1963, school districts should be properly organized. Without non-operating school districts, and without some 400 districts making very little effort to support public education, the wealth of the state, wherever it is, should support an adequate program of education for every child in the state, wherever he lives. State government should assume a proper share of financial responsibility for the total cost of education. South Dakota's percentage is 10%, while the national average is 40%. Surely we can attain the average of what the other states are doing. Now, mind you, this says nothing about the manner of distributing state funds to the districts. What it does say is this: a school district gets its support from three main sources: local taxes, state aids, and miscellaneous revenues. In South Dakota, over 80% of the total monies expended for schools comes from local tax sources, about 10% from state aids, and the balance from miscellaneous revenue sources. Any great expenditure of the state, such as public education, should rely on revenue sources that are closely related to the wealth-producing sources of the state, and property has drastically lost its position as a producer of wealth. During the 65 years prior to 1945, ownership of property as a source of income nationally dropped to less than 1/4 of its former relative position. It would relieve the burden on local property taxes if South Dakota were to set its state support of schools at the national average, 40% of the cost of schools. Naturally, the problem of finding the funds to enable the state to increase its support to the national average is a legislative matter. But it is more than obvious that any increase can only come through a more diversified tax structure for supporting schools, including a broadened base for the sales tax, an increase in the sales tax, and income taxes, both personal and corporate. One more goal is necessary by 1963. To assist school districts in achieving quality standards of education, the Department of Public Instruction should receive increased appropriations. This would enable schools to get better assistance from the department in working with local problems like curriculum, especially on the elementary level, reorganization of school districts, the introduction of guidance to enable our high school youth to make intelligent plans for their future, and finally, the processing of the many reports for us to know what the schools are currently doing instead of waiting almost a year for this data. The schools are in your hands, brother. There are things you can do. First, inform yourself about the school situation. Second, make your wishes known to your legislator, and then follow up to see that your wishes are given consideration in the legislature. You can do it, and it all depends on you.
So I stayed and listened to that bird. The more I listened, the more sense old Phineas made. Now, if you'll excuse me, the school board, the PTA committee, and some of us interested citizens are meeting with our legislators to discuss how we can get better schools in our community. If you have any questions or want more information, the Committee for Education can help you. Write to the committee, Box 501, Huron, South Dakota.